They say we should have known better than to fall so deep down into this rabbit hole we found. And I was thinking...
Hi, this is Nikolai, and you're listening to my dad, Rafal, co-host James Jardian, and featuring Mr. Jim Tiller on the one and only Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. Plug in, listen up, and enjoy.
Deep into this pool of regrettable situations. Pitch black, think back to the last time that we were happy.
All right. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome down the Security Rabbit Hole to another edition of the Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. This is Raph. Jim's over there above me, and I so badly just want to dive into this one. But first, a couple of things. There's an Instagram account now for this podcast. I'll post little snippets and who, what, where's there every once in a while. I guess people like the socials. If you are on LinkedIn, come check out the podcast home on LinkedIn. Just look up Down the Security Rabbit Hole. I post all these there. All these episodes there. I post opportunities to chat with our guests. You guys should take advantage of that if you find something interesting that we're talking about that you want to get in on, and just some news and stuff. And you can always obviously find us on YouTube, where we stream these live as we record them, like this one right now. And then they get released to the podcast and everybody else can see them. But if you're in early, catch these. All right. That aside, ladies and gentlemen, I give you Mr. Sam Lyle. Sam, introduce yourself. Tell the good people who you are, where you are, and I'll do the rest.
Well, I am Dr. Sam Lyles. I'm a former professor from Purdue. Went back into industry a while back. I've been a CISO at multiple organizations, from everything from the Army Corps of Engineers to the Deputy CISO and CISO of Harley-Davidson. So I've done a few different places. Currently, I am in the waning days or the early days of retirement, the waning days of my career. I'm sitting on a sailboat out here in Annapolis, Maryland. I sail up and down the West Coast, the East Coast, going down to the Bahamas and places like that. That's how I spend my days.
I'm jealous. I'm very, very jealous. I'm recording from my home studio. Jim's recording from his studio, and you're out. Do you have at least good weather? Looks like you got sunshine.
It's 81, 82 degrees currently, sunshiny, and we're keeping an eye on the Atlantic because it's that time of year. That's why we're north of Hatteras.
That's right.
Yes, that's what we're doing right now.
All right, awesome. Well, folks, if you followed this this build up on LinkedIn, I put it out there. Sam had an interesting post on his thoughts on the acquisition of CyberArk by our friends at Palo Alto. Obviously, I have my opinions, as you guys know, on Consolidation. They seem to match pretty closely. So I figured I'm just going to wind them up and just let them go. But here's the thing. I'll put a link to that post, by the way. But here's the thing. Consolidation in the market space, the creation of platforms isn't new. It's been around forever. Companies like HP, IBM, and CA, remember CA, and others have been doing this for a while. There's like a, I don't know, is it like a hype curve equivalent, or at least a path? It's a defined path. You get a startup, it starts to do interesting things. You know, it gets funded by VC, then it goes public, and then it gets acquired by a PE firm or somebody else, and just things happen, and it goes off. Sam, let's start with this. Your feelings on this specific acquisition of CyberArk by Palo, and why you decided now is the right time to write about it, and just give us your true feelings about it.
So there's a couple of different things, maybe more than that, but a few things about it that concern me, right? So the first part is I have former graduate students that work for both of these organizations. And so I'm looking at and thinking about it from the employee aspect. When you start merging companies, what happens? They start shedding employees. That's just the nature of
every time.
Mergers and acquisitions. You know, I have been on the inside of several mergers and acquisitions myself. In fact, one of the things I bring to the table as a CISO is the ability to do mergers and acquisitions. I've done many of them from sitting inside the companies doing these. So there was that. I was worried about the people involved in it. Then there's also the fact that with a couple of mergers and acquisitions that have happened, I've felt pretty burned as a CISO. I could speak about specifics like this one involving Cisco and Splunk. But the thing is that, my roadmaps completely evaporated. My promises from the company completely evaporated. Relationships disappeared. It was just crazy and injected a certain level of chaos into my program that just was a parasite on my time. And, my team couldn't necessarily handle this because I'm not talking, just at the technical layer. I'm talking about at all levels of the businesses that we're dealing with. And so I had to start negotiating, changing. My external counsel was calling me on a daily basis because of this. So this is the kind of things that happen during these things, because you don't really think about this when a merger and acquisition happens. But if it's going to change your IR partner or your technology stack or change your fundamental risk portfolio, or you're even going to have to go through the idea, for God's sake, of having to reevaluate them as a third-party vendor because it's a material change, everybody wants to get involved at that point in time.
Yeah.
And so that's why I looked at it. I was like, these are two companies that I've dealt with separately for decades at this point. And now they're going to merge, and it's going to completely change the fundamental practices that we utilize.
Yeah. All right. So let's zoom out. We'll start by zooming out a bit. Are you in the world of the CISO? Are you more on the side that you'd prefer as much to come from one vendor because it might work together better, or would you prefer to cobble and duct tape your solutions together from like the younger, smaller, scrappier companies?
So I'm more first principles. So I like the idea of bringing things back. What are the basic concrete things? A very Aristotelian kind of concept. I want to be very basic in the things that I do and build the best practice, technical practice within my organization possible. Now, I also don't like bloat. I don't like wasted functionality. I don't like a surface area that explodes because I have 20 vendors when I could have one. It's really a balancing act that has to happen. And so what I try and do is I try and build the best thing possible. Now, I'll be honest, every organization I've walked into already had a tech stack. And so when you walk in and they've already got a tech stack, now you're into a change, adapt, overcome kind of mentality.
Yeah, fair. That's fair. That's fair. I'm curious your thoughts on this, because I've worked both at the very, very small, a la 4 people, and then at the very, very large, a la HP. And I've been in mergers when AccuVant and Fishnet merged and became Optiv. I've been in acquisitions. I've been acquired. I have to tell you, I've never had a good experience in any of that as an employee or as somebody further in my career, kind of up the management chain, right? Now, it's always better to acquire than to be acquired. I say always, but probably, unless you do what the folks at Blue Coat did to Symantec, in which case maybe it was better to be acquired. But it's let's start with on the employee side, because it always feels like, man, like you said, there's duplicates everywhere now, and even if there aren't, right, you're supposed to bring back efficiencies, you're supposed to bring back cost savings, and improve your bottom line and all that. That can't be great for the employee part of the conversation.
Well, look at this. So if it's a PE firm doing it, it's going to be a leveraged buyout. It's going to be an 80 to 90% leveraging, which means you're going to be massively in debt as a company all of a sudden. You're going to have to be returning a financial return 3 to 5x of whatever the entry point is. Yeah, I do the business side. I'm not just technical. So in doing 3 to 5x return with a massive amount of debt means you're going to have to shed anywhere between 30 and 4% of your population from the merged companies, which means you're going to be substantially changing the structure of that. The problem is it comes back to how you solve programming things. You can't just throw more monkeys and solve a problem, nor can you just take away a bunch of them and expect everybody to do the same. And so you see a huge change in what the capabilities of the companies are, and it's not always the value add that you originally put into the two different companies.
Let's take a quick break.
Hey there. Quick break from the show to tell you about a new podcast you're going to want in your rotation. It's called the Technically Friends podcast, hosted by Harrison Wolf and Timothy Reuter. Each week, we sit down with friends and former colleagues, folks now running teams, launching companies, and even opening restaurants to talk life, work, and how careers really unfold. If you're into honest conversation, unexpected pivots, and the tech that's shaping tomorrow, the Technically Friends podcast has you covered. Search Technically Friends wherever you get your podcasts and hit follow.
Yes, I'm trying to, in my head, I'm saying what I'm thinking, and I don't want to say it out loud because then we lose our PG rating. But
this conversation usually involves bourbon, cigars, and a lot of people yelling.
I can't smoke in my office, although I need to figure out a way to do that. And it's middle of the afternoon, so I mean, bourbon's not out of the question, but I didn't pour one. So here's the deal: when we see these things, right? It's usually big company buying smaller company to complement some piece of their portfolio that they don't have, which means the little companies innovate. And by the time we figure out which one of the 3 or 7, or in some cases 25 is like one of the likely winners, some big company that can't innovate because they're too big and too many shareholders and that, they'll buy them, integrate them in, and that's their innovation. And poof, it's gone. Like remember that South Park episode? And it's gone. And that's frustrating.
So one of the things that we see, right, is so when a company acquires another company, there's reasons they do it, right? The first reason is they need the capability. That's the golden child, right? That we need that. They could be buying customers. They don't need any of the technology. They just want to buy the customers. Yeah. The third one is the more evil perception, and which you never want to be, which is we're buying you to make you shut down. We don't want you in the marketplace at all.
Yeah, competitors.
And so when you look at that, if I'm sitting there with a standard kind of mindset of a startup, and I'm in, maybe round C, so I've got millions of dollars on the table, and somebody comes and says, "Well, triple your investment, take it off, and you go sailing, Sam," which has literally happened to me in the past. Then you go sailing, and that's the way you do it. And this is kind of the nature of this market. You got to understand which way it is. Now, the companies are highly incentivized to just tell you, "Oh, we're going to do this because it's going to be a great thing for everybody. We're going to do this."
It's always great for everybody. That's what the line is. It's always great for you. Look, Sam, you're going to get access to so much more technology under our portfolio. We've got so many things we're bringing together to bear. It's all going to work great together, and it's going to make your life easier. And usually none of those things come to life.
Absolutely. But, when I talk about Cisco and how all that Splunk stuff happened, I had roadmaps from 2 different companies that said, "Hey, we're going to be doing this kind of stuff." And I sold my leadership on, these are the roadmaps. These are where our licensing are going. This is where our enterprises are going. And in 1 quarter, I had to go in and change all of that. Now, the first quarter of that, after the merger had been announced, they were saying it was all going to be happy. And I told my board about it. This is happening. We're keeping our eye on it. We're handling it through this third-party risk portfolio structure. We're going to do this. The second time I walked in, I said, they're changing our entire enterprise agreement. It's going to be a 3x hit on our bottom line. It's going to be this. It's going to be this. Wow. It's going to be this. And they went on and on. Because what happened was they were like, if you want to preserve these functionalities in our contracts, not necessarily in the technology, just in the contracts, you have to buy this extended license agreement with us, minimum 3 years. And that's a hit today. Now, sure, I can amortize that over the next 3 years. That's fine. But I'd still going in and saying, I need a 3x increase on this license structure. And that jumps past the CEO in a lot of cases, in a lot of companies, and goes directly to a board of directors that says, you can't spend that kind of money without our purview.
Well, I mean, look, the smaller company you were buying from, you had leverage over, right? They needed to sell you. Even if you wanted their stuff, you're like, hey, I'm bigger. You need to sell to me. I dictate the terms. I dictate the red lines, and you're going to give me a great price. I'm either an early adopter, or we're going to at least come to a fair agreement. Large companies care none at all for that. And I mean, can you imagine the example I keep giving people is the one that, I got bombarded with recently. There's another one of these things on LinkedIn is the member VMware. People complained about their licensing basically doing like was it 3 to 10x somewhere. All over LinkedIn. It's all anybody talked about. Like everything was going to be great, and then suddenly, bam! Here's this giant, requirement to buy in, and you have no option. You're not going to, go in and redline stuff with their new overlords.
No. And, so the VMware reminds me that, companies will come by and they'll buy the intellectual property or license stock of a company and say, hey, we're coming in, we're going to buy this. This is all legacy stuff. We'll manage it. We're going to do this. This is going to be our business model. And then they ramp up the costs behind the scenes on you. And you're going like, wait a second here. What has happened? And sometimes that stuff's not even really overt because it's still happening under the white label of the original company. So it's like, how, just tracking that kind of stuff at a third party kind of management is almost impossible in some cases.
Do you think that, I'm curious, because one of the things, this sort of path we're on right now with like, okay, there's an acquisition, all of a sudden they just slam you with cost increase, right? Do you think that's basically just a fact of where we are in the arc of the industry as a whole, where we are as it relates to products? Because think about, thousands and thousands of products now, there's 100 that do the same thing kind of thing. And there's so much energy now to like build these solutions, make, like you said, you went through this whole process to get budgeted, implement your plan. And now they know that. They know they're an embedded required piece and they can triple their cost, their price to you, because it's going to cost you 10x to get out and to get into something else, right? So I can almost hear the conversation in the PE room where you're going, hey, we're just going to triple our prices because it's going to be impossible for somebody to get out of it. How prevalent do you think that conversation is happening right now?
I think it's got to be very prevalent. That's why I peeve them off. So if you've been a software developer in the past, you know about the idea of tightly coupled versus loosely coupled structures in software code, right? So when I look at my stack, and one of the reasons why I was kind of hesitant on the first question about how, do I want the big one? Do I want the little one? Well, the thing is, one of the requirements I build in is the idea that I can drop any one vendor in a quarter. I could pick any vendor in my entire portfolio and say, you're gone in a quarter. I can't do two, maybe. I can't do three, but I can do any one vendor. And so when you start structuring the requirements around that, what do you need? Well, you have to keep a backup in your back pocket. You have to understand what the costs would be. You need to be doing structured analysis throughout your year. Your team has to be abreast of what the newest technologies are. But I can drop any one vendor in a quarter. That means I can drop 4 vendors a year, but I can drop any one vendor in a quarter. And so I had to do this in one case with a company that I worked with, and it was the most bizarre thing I've ever gone through. We dropped Microsoft. Think about that. Now, we didn't drop across the board. We dropped all of their Office suite, all of that stuff, and went G Suite, right? 2 quarters later, we went from G Suite back to Microsoft.
Oh, my.
So in a year, we changed twice. Now, the reason being had nothing to do with Office, it had nothing to do with anything like that. It all had to do with GCP and the cost of Azure, right? The real cost for us was in our data centers. And so both of them started messing with us in our data centers, and we said, you will no longer be our vendor of choice, and we cut them off at the knees. And that they listened to. They didn't care really about the Office, but the idea that we would be leaving their data centers and leaving a lot of money, because the company, I can't really say who it is, but we're the 5th largest at the time buyer of GCP.
Yeah.
So they were very interested in making sure that we stay, but we did that. And that idea, that's where I kind of gelled the idea and firmed it up, because even though it wasn't my CISO stack, I had to be ready for everything that went on around that. And so I built an entire playbook out of that, and I've used it ever since.
Can I ask? Because that's an interesting question. Because the whole idea of vendor lock-in has been a conversation we've had for years. And remember when cloud came in, people were like, "Oh, you could deploy to multiple, you could move between them." Nobody actually could because it was impossible, right? But think about now. I pick an endpoint vendor, an EDR vendor. I had this conversation at Black Hat last week, sitting in between two guys that operated different MSSPs and an EDR vendor. And I just asked a simple question. I said, I looked at the EDR vendor and said, if I want your product managed and I have him right now as a vendor, can I fire him and go to him tomorrow? And what does that look like? And all of them were like, why would you do that? So think contractual terms. I don't know, whatever. They decide they're going to outsource to China and I don't want to be operated by that. And the answer is, well, it's complicated, right? Because you can't just easily pick up and move your data from one MSSP or one product to another. Like if you're switching from one SIM to another, do you just lose years of historical information? Do you care? What happens to all that? Do they just like nuke it? Like it is so complex.
Functions are different. The technologies are different. This data storage mechanisms are different. You look at it, unstructured data problems. I've done from Elastic to Splunk in the past.
Wow.
And that was not fun. Talking a lot of engineering brains that had nothing to do with working with a SIM. Inside of all that stuff, just looking at how data is stored differently, trying to recreate how that's going to be able to move. Because regardless of what I wanted to do, which is probably just cut off Elastic at the knees based on licensing, I wanted to do that. But the thing was, I'm in a regulated industry. I have to keep data for 7 years of all kinds. It's just like if it was security oriented data, I have to keep it for 7 years. And I'm not going to pay for 2 different vendors for 7 years until I can roll the data off into an archive. And what does it do me for any good? Because how many times are you in a threat hunt and you need to go back through data that might be 2 years old? So I need to be able to do that. Yeah, that gets into a difficult thing, and that's vendor lock-in right there.
Yeah. So there's vendor lock-in, right? Which you get stuck in. It's almost impossible as a customer, I think, from the customer perspective, to have any flexibility in that. Every back end is different. Every front end is different. The requirements are different, even though they do this. Like something is, I say simple. Something is as well defined as EDR. Something is well defined as SIM. Like the way they ingest data, the way they process, the way they store, the way that the rules are written, the requirements, the complexities, the processes for doing everything is 100% different. And yet you're stuck in a position where like, I got to go, I got to move, and it sucks. And I can't imagine, because I don't think a lot of folks, when they think about buying a product and saying, well, if I don't like them, I'll just switch off. I don't know how many people actually in the leadership positions calculate the cost it's going to take, not just the new product cost, but the cost that it's going to take to go from here to here. It's like when you move, you're like, oh, the new house is cheaper than the old house. You're like, yeah, but do you like it's whatever. It's a mile closer to where you want to be. Like, but you have to pack your entire life up. You have to move everything. You have to then you got to reset your rooms. If the rooms aren't even the same, you don't have a different amount of rooms. Right? Like maybe you just don't have a guest bedroom anymore. You don't have a dining room anymore in one you had one in the other. Now you suddenly have a library. Like, well, how am I going to, I got to get a lot of books now. Like all these things are different. Talk to us a little bit about your experience having to move stuff off, and has it ever been good, and why not?
No, no, it's not. So think about this, so you named all the things, but the question I often get when I'm talking to people about this in other venues is, why would you move? What's the big deal? What would cause you to move? And it's really, really simple. Licensing costs change. Maybe there's a merger or acquisition occurs that I can't deal with anymore. Like this, if you're within a PE firm, which I've been in the past, and the PE firm happens to own a quarter of Splunk or something like that, then you're going to move on to Splunk, pretty much guaranteed. They're going to strongly incentivize you to do so.
Right.
There's just things that happen inside of the business that constrain what you're going to have as technology. So when you look at the costs, you have those costs, those incremental costs, you have the standard licensing costs, you have your standard uptick costs. So it's like one time to install, it's going to be X. Well, that's great. But if I say I'm going to handle that with all of my engineers currently, if I've got a big program, let's say I've got 10 engineers. I don't know how big that would be to you, but to me, that'd be a nice number to have to do just a project like this, right? If you have 10 engineers and you take them off of something like threat hunting, what does your fundamental risk quotient change? It's like,
that's right.
You just rob Peter to pay Paul, as they say. And so you have to look at all of those kind of things. And in the past, I've tried to do something very specific in which I've tried to get the vendor to put some skin on the game to say, okay, you have 90 days to help me get this stood up. You have another 90 days to get me running it. Almost always the first year is going to be a tuning period. You're going to be doubled up on cost during that period of time for whatever technology you're replacing. And the vendor has certain things to hit. I've never had the vendor actually go past the first quarter in that assistance. They always seem to disappear in that second quarter of assistance. We're just not available. We're being difficult because we don't make, meetings when they need it, those kind of things. So
I'll tell you, Sam, it gets expensive to continue to support a customer that's not giving you new money.
Exactly. I know.
Right?
I understand where it comes from. But if it's in the contract,
then that's, wow. But that's different, allegedly.
It's like all the VARs I've ever had, I've only had one VAR in my entire history that has ever gave me the engineering support that I've required in the contract. I'm going with you as a value-added reseller. You're supposed to give me engineering support over a period of time for so many hundreds of hours in a lot of cases. And I've only had one VAR ever actually kick in that engineering support.
I tell you what, having worked for a VAR, I think the current state of the union is that VARs have forgotten what the V stands for.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And they'll put in hours. They'll sell you the hours, right? They'll boil it into the contract. And then what'll happen is they'll burn 90% of those hours actually going through more sales processes with you. So
that's right.
You sign the contract, next thing you know, they're just cooking those hours for things that, talking you through something you already know. I don't need help in this area. I need help in this area.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And by the time you get to that area, they disappeared because they've given you the hours that they included in the contract. I've seen a lot of that.
Exactly. I'm like, do not charge me for sales time.
That's exactly what they're doing.
So
it's exhausting.
Sam, have you ever seen this work? Have you ever seen where there's got to be at least one example? Like, it can't all be shit, right? There's got to be one example where a big vendor bought a small one and you're like, okay, I see it. This is good. I'm getting something out of this, and it actually worked out.
I can't think of any that have been spectacularly successful, to be honest.
Wildly? Come on, you got to be one.
Look at some of the Microsoft acquisitions that they've done. They're a very large company with a very, very standard acquisition structure. And, the thing is when they acquire a company, they take that company and whatever it was doing and however it was doing it, it becomes a Microsoft way. That's it. Mm-hmm. And so it becomes that way. And so when they do that, I look at that as a mild success. Not that I'm happy with a lot of times the product that they produce.
Yeah, that's fair.
It's a depressing conversation in some ways.
It is. Cause there's gotta be, this keeps happening because this is a formula that, I don't know, it's got to be working for somebody, even if it's there's customers on advisory boards. Customers vote with their dollars. Is it just like if this completely didn't work, right? If it was bad for all customers when this happened, wouldn't the consolidators at some point realize that this isn't like that they wouldn't do it? I mean, follow the money, right? No.
Yep. I think that you look at it from the business perspective, they expect to have a downturn, right? It's kind of like the Gartner hype cycle. They'll see a downturn, trough of disillusionment, and then they'll see the increase, which is true. In the business perspective, we see that. And what we have within the security world is when we're down there in that trough of disillusionment, we're dealing with some very significant issues as far as what the company is providing for us. Being blinded to my traffic, like happened with my Elastic Splunk, that's a big deal, right? And having to explain that to a regulator, Well, if we don't have those 30 days of traffic because they were lost in the transition over. That's a big deal. If you lose a high trust or name your favorite kind of certification for security, you're having some very strong conversations.
That doesn't sound like a winning strategy. So aside from essentially killing companies, because I feel like there's really like the big companies out there, the big vendor VARs. Like if one of these were not VARs, sorry, the big not the holding companies, because those all suck, but it's those that are trying to build out a platform. I'm still hopeful, maybe at this point just freaking delusional, but I'm still hopeful in that. I don't know, somebody's bound to get, even if they get it half right, because the problem with all these best of breed tools that are all independent is you, Sam, have to buy the engineering talent to make it all work together and glue it together, right? Because they all work great independently. But we've seen what happens when security technology works great independently, but not together. Like, look at the news for the last 30 years almost, right? This doesn't change. So everybody says, no, this time it'll be different. We're going to buy a bunch of these companies. We're going to stick them together. Look, we've created a platform. And I want to believe that it's not McAfee from mid-2000, was it 2006, 2007, something like that. Remember when they had, what that was called? Some data exchange, threat data exchange, or some kind of exchange, something, right? When they were suddenly, like, the promise was that the endpoint product and the web filter and the email gateway and the network sensor and the server protection, they were all going to work together. And you're like, that's amazing. I'm glad you've done this. So when does this all get released? They're like, well, the endpoint comes out this quarter. The web gateway comes out in 2 quarters. The email one and the server thing are out next year. And you're like, hold on. You mean they're all on different release cycles, so none of them are actually going to work together? What? Right? And why can't we? Like, somebody's bound to figure this out, Sam. I don't want to keep ranting because I will, and somebody stop me.
The thing is I think that you're on to something. I think what will happen is, instead of being in close alignment between the two companies, where they merge together and they're kind of this and they're kind of that, it's probably going to be in the cycle. It's going to be those companies that follow each other. So if you look at, how Palo has been doing all of its stuff with Cortex and all these other things and all of its acquisitions, it's all around this one kind of central theme of network security kind of thing. But then it leaves me on my host kind of like open. Maybe there's a way to do that. If you look at some of the other companies out there, I hate to bring it up again. It's like Microsoft. That's the entire Defender strategy, right? Is to take it from endpoint through Azure. That's the structure that they're trying to do there. I'm not saying they're doing it well. I'm not very happy with when we red team Defender, but it does do better than nothing. So,
but think of the promise, right? So think of like a CrowdStrike where they've got endpoint to SIM to identity and all these things. Like, on paper, it covers all the pain points that need to be hit. Palo's coming at this. So you got CrowdStrike coming at this from the endpoint. Palo's coming at this from the network layer. They bought CSPM. They've got the firewalls. They've got the this. They got the that. They got the like. Okay, they're coming at the problem. They're consolidating all these little point solutions into a network security suite. I wish I knew what the hell Cisco was doing, but I'm sure there's a strategy there somewhere. But you know what? I've seen the problem with companies like that is I've seen that story before. I'm old. I remember when Cisco bought Okina. Remember those guys? I still have the CD. All right. The funeral was like
Cisco.
The funeral was like the day after acquisition. They were like, haha, dead. Like, it became Okina beta, Cisco security agent, and then gone. You're like, but that looks awesome. It should have. Nope, didn't work. Sorry, didn't make it. We couldn't fit it in there. And like, I want to believe there's a strategy behind it because obviously there is, but the execution falls apart. So, Sam, what do you think kills? Like, what's driving the bad execution? Did the people doing this just suck? Is there lack of vision? Is it that they've bought products and they didn't do enough due diligence because where those things are just never going to work together? There's too much disparity. Like, what's the thing?
So, not to jeopardize your PG rating, but there's a book. It's called Deals from Hell. It's about mergers and acquisitions. Unfortunately, one of the acquisitions in there I had to deal with personally, not the acquisition itself, but what happened afterwards. And it basically goes through what causes these mergers and acquisitions to go sideways. And it's almost always the same thing. Business elements don't align, legal presentation doesn't align, whatever, the regulatory doesn't align, all these like things that have nothing to do with the technology. When you get down to the technology, often it's the engineers don't speak the same language, have cultures, they have different things. Now you're into people processes. But nothing to do with bits and bytes. It's all about people processes. And when you get down to that point and you're looking at it going like, didn't anybody think about asking if we could align these organizations culturally? And no,
no, because it's a calculation that's happening across a handful of people, and they're looking at strictly the numbers. And if I have a company that's, has 200 million in revenues, that's operating all this kind of stuff you mentioned at the beginning, right? And I'm going to take on some debt. It's not, I've already paid the money. I'm not going to sit there and put even more money in. And then I'm going to be losing people. You're going to lose 10 to 20% of your staff on both sides of the equation. You're going to lose some really good ones in the beginning, perhaps, because they're going to take the buyouts. They're going to cash in the stocks. And so it kind of creates this like upheaval of things that actually work contradictory to, I think, the backroom conversation or the front room conversation that drove, hey, you know what, if we were to stitch this with this and we could do some amazing things. And I think that's how they always start.
Yep.
But then they don't follow that they don't peer through the end of that tunnel and see all the things that are sort of fighting that a little bit. And then you wake up and you got a pile of money you got to spend to make those things work together, like Raph said, which has been already spent by enterprises trying to make these things stitch together. I mean, does it really just kind of come down to, as it gets handed off from one part of the business to the other, it just sort of loses its identity and then fails?
So when you look at like even a large scale multi-billion-dollar merger, right? So big, Fortune 100 level kind of mergers, they'll have the legal team from the acquired and the acquirer in a room, but a very small segment of it, usually GC, a couple of special attorneys, and then an external counsel element for each one of those entities. Because if you're at that kind of level, there's going to be state, federal, all kinds of things involved. Then at the same time, you'll have a room of functionary accountants sitting in the back room doing due diligence against both sides, right, to make sure that this is going to work. And then maybe you bring in like a CISO type person and a CIO type person or CTO or CDO or whatever from each side, and they talk about what it's going to be. And you're going to set up MSAs, you're going to set up all kinds of other things. We have service agreements between the companies in the merger aspect because they're still separate entities until you have the idea of the acquirer versus the acquired. And it's not always what you think. Sometimes it's the big company is actually being acquired by the smaller company, but they don't talk about it that way in the media. But legally, that's what's going on because that makes it a better tax, whatever, regulatory structure. So those kind of things go on behind the scenes. When you're sitting in those meetings and you're watching some of this stuff and you're going like, your guys speak Chinese and my guys speak Russian kind of conversation. This conversation is not going to go very far when the engineers have to get together. How are we going to do this? My favorite is when they say, well, just fly them to some place and have them all meet. And in a weekend, they can figure it out. It ain't gonna happen like that. It's a iterative process when you're doing
not real life
integration, right? There are experts out there that do this stuff that probably be looking at me going like, you don't know what you're talking about. But this is the way it looks to me from inside of an M&A and as a customer on the outside. Because when you look at some of the crazy chaos that happened, I mean, during a merger a while back, I'm not gonna say who because there was legal proceedings. I called up my service rep and I said, hey, we think this tool's been owned. We need to know whether or not you guys are searching it. And my guy called me up like an hour later and says, I don't work there anymore. It took me 3 days to get a call back on a possible exploit against my vendor. 3 days. And I'm like escalating. I'm on LinkedIn going after the CEO, hoping that they'll answer me. That's just crazy.
Well, I remember, like you talk about mergers from hell. I remember early 2000s, in fact, right at 2000, 2001, I was working for a financial, and they merged a new wave company, kind of new .com style, with a very old 25, 30 year old financial services firm. Our side did everything digital. They had a floor full of Xerox machines. We were on Compaq gear with Microsoft operating systems and SQL Server. They were on IBM running Ericsson DB2.
Yeah.
And by the time they said, hey, we need to get this platform integrated, it'll take a month or two. That was the end of that conversation. I think like 3 years later, they were on they're finally getting to that month or two part. But it's like, the way people think is different. And it turns out it's really difficult to make things that weren't built together, even some that were built together, actually work together, not work alongside each other, not tolerate each other, but actually work together, so that I think you get the actual, pardon my use of this word, synergy of the two different companies that you're trying to work. So, like, hey, one's written in, for workstations on Microsoft, the other one's a Mac company, like something as simple as that.
All right.
It's just, these things are challenging.
Think about how you build up a product portfolio. You start with a set of requirements, you build up a product, you do it iteratively, you move through it, fail fast, whatever kind of strategy you want to do, DevSecOps, I don't care. You build a product and it starts out with X and it ends up Y, Z, and you're happy you get there, right? And now you're suddenly going to take two end state products and wire them together and think that iterative process, which was built on first principles or bringing things back to basics, is going to work when you start out with chaos in the first place. And it's not going to work. It doesn't happen. Now, some companies, I'm thinking of Amazon specifically, went at one point and went back to basics, right? And they said, every product that we put out will have a defined set of APIs, and whatever you build in the future has to work with those APIs. So if we add another product, you have these defined set of APIs that everybody else has. And still, it gets crazy when you have to deal with AWS. But they set out with a specific goal to do that.
I think there's two ways that these types of things happen, right? In reality, we all hope for like the synergistic manifestation of fairy dust, where things just magically work together, and developers and engineers and product owners and product officers and roadmap owners go, yeah, we can just merge these things together. It'll be great. We'll all hug it out. It'll be fine. The reality is you're brute forcing. You've got a 25-pound sledgehammer. You're putting a square peg into a round hole, and it's going to fit, damn it, because otherwise you're going to break it. And I think that's how some of the time it just like, that's just how it works. And until, they work, these platforms work alongside each other, not actually with each other. And that therein lies my great disappointment is I believe in the platforms. I want to believe that the platformers will work. I want to believe that two things that were meant to work together will be better than two things that were meant to only operate independently, and you can work them together, because integrations suck. They're always brittle, right? And I don't know, although I've seen integrations that were worse. So what do I know?
One of the things is take that Gartner hype cycle and we look at that trough of disillusionment, or what I call the valley of woe. And we're sliding towards that right now with this particular one, just the same as we did with Splunk and Cisco. And we're going to continue down there. A lot of work will happen, a lot of pain, effort, sweat, blood, tears, name your favorite thing we got to put into it. And you'll continue to climb till we get to somewhere, a plateau at some point in time where it works. We've seen that with other ones. And the thing is that as a customer, I don't have that priced in. I don't have that budgeted. I don't have the engineers to apply to all that effort that I have to do. And I've been a customer of CyberArk and Palo Alto for many engagements. I've either brought CyberArk in because I liked it a lot, or I've brought Palo Alto in because I got students that work there that I trust. I've used, 42 their incident response group, tabletops, talk to my executives, whatever. I've had these companies come in individually, but I know from experience that I'm going to have to go through that if I am in a CISO role. And every CISO that I talk to, we talk through this, and they go like, okay, I'm like, did you carry any KPIs through with this project when you were looking at what you were rating them against? And when you brought them in for a review, did you look for that kind of stuff? And they're like, no, because we're too busy trying to solve the problem, right? We don't have time for that process stuff. We're in jeopardy here. So that's the key thing that I was really trying to get across to people in that piece that I wrote was this is going to suck, right? And there was a lot of, at that point in time, it was kind of funny, as I saw kind of a shift. So I'm not an influencer by any stretch of the imagination. I'm too ugly for being in the influencer crowd. And I'm a bit of a curmudgeon. But the thing is that I was seeing all this stuff about Happy Fufu, another great merger, and I'm going like,
who
talking to?
I guess, Sam, time will tell what this one ends up as. I'm going to continue to be the eternal optimist that somebody's going to get it right, and we're going to figure out security as a platform that's simply going to be able to work together. I don't see that happening on the horizon anytime soon, but I think if anybody has the opportunity, I'm going to stay hopeful for the CrowdStrikes, the Palos, the Microsofts, the Ciscos. Like, those are the four that realistically could do it. Whether they will, whether they'll put down the ego and do what's better for the industry versus what's best for the the PE firm or the VC firm or their own bankers. I don't know. Maybe at some point those things are, what's better for everybody and the bankers aligns. Maybe not.
A friend of mine tells me all the time when he's trying to talk me off the ledge. He says, nobody's in this business to do cybersecurity. They're only in it to do business, right? This is business for them. And gotta admit, in the cybersecurity world, most of these companies, the CrowdStrikes of the world and the Palo Altos, they're not very big companies, right? That's why I'm always it's a very small niche that reaches into a lot of the fundamentals of a company. And that's and I look at some of the stuff, just the idea of how these companies interact within and how much chaos agents they can become is insane. I mean, when CrowdStrike had their outage, I was in the middle to the day and almost the minute when it was announced. I was briefing my board on a CrowdStrike acquisition.
Well,
and I was like, well, that was bad timing on my part. But then again, I told the board, I says, this is a hiccup. Every company has hiccups. This is the way it is. Because they had over the period of 10 years, 15 years, got a lot of trust from me in what they were doing. But at the same time, I watched some of the stuff that they did in the cleanup, and I was like, it's like, would I recommend them to companies? If you're that kind of company needs that kind of product, yeah.
Yeah. All right. I think we're past out of time, but I think we're out of new. We could make some repeated points, but I think we've covered it. Sam, this has been fun. I'm still jealous of you being on a boat, and I am confused why you don't have a scotch and cigar in your hand. But given that you are,
complains if I smoke inside, so
okay, that's the cigar. I still, that doesn't explain the lack of scotch.
I finished it.
I love it. That is the man right there. All right, hey. Dude, it's been forever. I've been trying to get you on the show. It is good to have you aboard. I thank you for your insight, man. This is I love reading you. I love listening to you more because it turns out experience does teach you things. And if you listen, you can shortcut some of those from the people that have done it before. So folks, I hope you found Sam's insight insightful. Sam's insight insightful. Look at that. Wow. Anyway, moving on. I hope you had a good listen. I hope you share this with your aspiring peers, and maybe even somewhere there's somebody that's listening to this going, there's some lessons here for my next acquisition, because the customer needs to be considered first, and really, like, you gotta do what's right, and we gotta figure out how to make everything better while still making money. And that is the golden goal. So, all right, Sam, thanks. Appreciate you. Great having you aboard. Jim, as always, has been fun. I enjoyed it probably way more than I should have. And folks, thanks for riding along. This has been another episode of the Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. Sam, I'm going to have you back on. I'm going to do some other topic, or the next time news like this breaks. It'll be just as fun. But we're doing it with Scotch and Cigars next time for surezies. Folks, thanks for listening. We'll catch you another time, another place on another Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. We'll see you later. Thanks for listening.
This is Bella. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to leave my dad a review and share this with your friends. Bye.